Okay, so here's my palette. I have white. There's that kind of lemon yellow color. There's bright red. There's Venetian red. And there's ultramarine blue and umber, that burnt umber color. So I'm just mixing a little bit of the Venetian red in with the yellow to kind of get a golden color. And then I'm going to make it green. So I'll add blue to it. So I'm just putting a dot of the blue in there at first to try and get it to green up a little bit. I know at first it might not seem like there's a lot of yellow in there, but there is some. And I'm adjusting it, so I'm adding more of the ultramarine blue to it. And then I'm comparing it to the apple, see how close I am. Putting more blue in. And I'm closing one eye when I hold up the palette knife and hold it up against the apple. I'm closing one eye to kind of really focus on that. You want to get about 5 different shades of green. And I've just separated a little pile there to start getting those values, because you want those 5 different shades. And you want them to read as values too. So you have a darker value, you have a lighter value, and a mid-tone. But you want about 5, so that's pretty close. I just added white to that blue mixture with the yellow and a little bit of that Venetian red. So that's a little bit yellower. I'm going to use that on highlights and also to try and make that form look round. You want it to look like it's curving around, like it's actually like a ball shape or a sphere. You don't want it to look flat. Okay, so that was about it. I'm also going to mix some colors as I go. So off camera I'll be mixing. But I'm going to start by painting the apple first. So I'm working on that dark side first. I'm getting the darkest value on that apple. And I'm working on a green apple. If you were working on a red apple, you'd use like Venetian red, a little bit of blue on the dark side, maybe some of the bright red too. And I'd probably have some yellow mixed in with the red to get some highlights. So I'm trying to lay in that color and try to get the surface covered, but also suggest that it's somewhat three-dimensional at this point. So it goes dark to kind of light, and then it goes back a little bit to dark on that right side there. And like you, most likely, I got a different apple than what I initially started out my block in with. And I'm just making adjustments. Like the one I have does not have a stem, and the one I first drew did have a stem. So I'm just going to be covering that. And remember, this is a painting that's built up in layers. So you're going to be layering this. And you'll see like my layers at first they look really thin. They go through a really ugly phase and then they start looking good after a while. Even oil painters, so when they paint, their first application of paint looks pretty thin until it dries. So multiple coats is the way to go. It's going to look really good if you put more work into it and you put more layers. You want to keep in mind that rule of painting thinly at first, and then as you progress into other layers, you're adding thicker application of paint. And I'm using different size brushes. I have a big brush, I have a medium brush, or a smaller brush, and then I have a really tiny brush there too. So it's okay to use multiple brushes. Okay, so here's that cast shadow I'm working back in again, trying to help define that apple shape. And I'm going a little bit darker. I'm also going to make it so that there's only one shadow, so that it's less confusing. So I'm going to pick the left shadow to keep. The right shadow I'm going to somewhat eliminate. But working in that cast shadow, having the value of the apple, I can see a lot more clearly the correct value of the cast shadow there. So I'm darkening that up, making that look a little bit more correct. And remember, as the cast shadow moves away, it's going to get softer on its edge. It's also going to pale out a little bit. I'm trying to see if the paint is still workable to put a second coat on. I'm actually pulling paint off in the process, so I'm going to wait and let this dry and then come back. Okay, so here's the cup, and I'm focusing the camera primarily on the cup just so you can see it a little bit more clearly. And I'm working in the values. And I'm just mixing burnt umber and blue and white together. Later I'll add a little bit of yellow, even a little bit of Venetian red, but that's it. Just burnt umber, ultra, and white. And if the values aren't perfect here, it's not the end of the world because it is the first real coat on top of the underpainting there. And I'm looking carefully at light and shadow. I'm trying to see the distorted shapes inside the water. And I'm comparing the top of the water to the side of the cup where you can see the water and trying to figure out which one's lighter, which one's darker, what shapes am I seeing. And at first you want to kind of simplify it for this layer. Later you can go back in and try and pick up more information. So here it's a little bit lighter. So I've added a little bit more whites to my brush. Got a little bit of blue on there. Trying to figure out where else in the painting or where else in the cup do I have that same value, or do I need to make it a little darker? So there's all these fascinating shapes inside of a water glass. If you look, it distorts things. You can see the white flooring being distorted in the cup. It's curving too. So what was a straight line, when you know it is a straight line, within the water, it will become distorted. And there I added a little bit of yellow into my light gray there. It's bouncing some light around. Here's where you're going to have some really fun values and highlights. So we're going to save the highlights for later. In fact, I didn't put them on the apple. I'm not going to yet. But once you do, the highlights are just going to kick it up a notch. It's going to be really fun to lay those in, to put those in. And ultimately, your goal on the glass is to get almost all the brown covered. If you can get all the brown covered, that's even better. And you're working on values. You're working on trying to make it look like a cylinder, to make it look round, like it's coming out in the middle and wrapping around that form. And you're playing with water distortion, which is fun. This is not something that's really easy to do. It's actually quite difficult. But it's going to help you in other areas of your work. On our next painting, it'll help too. Getting a little bit of that rim of the cup in. You have to understand that the rim of the cup, that lip up there, it's not all one color. There's dark sides and light sides. You have to figure out where is it darker, where is it lighter. Although again, at this stage, you don't have to make it perfect. So I'm just trying to put in a little bit more value there, trying to go right on top. And it may be too wet to get very much on there. Just trying to push it a little bit more. Okay, so this is what I have on the cup so far. And like I said, it's gonna have a lot more value ultimately.